Okay, Jack Yates here again, graduate student, Masters of Science of Marketing at DU. This is maybe my fifth session. It was a presentation format, and the level was intermediate, open to all badges. And this is for my first day, and I have to say this was probably my favorite session of the entire day. It was called Beyond Limits: Harnessing Altered States for Peak Performance. And I'm gonna try to talk fast because this was like definitely the best session I've ever been to. I've been to since I've been here at South by Southwest. So the speaker was this guy named Dave Asprey. I hope I'm pronouncing that last name right, Dave Asprey, who was sort of introduced and described. I'd never heard of him, but I was talking to some people next to me. And this one woman who was incredibly excited to see him said he was the father of biohacking. That a lot of people out there, I think one of the people they mentioned was Andrew Huberman. If that name sounds familiar, look him up, but he's not really super relevant. Is inspired by him. That this guy started the entire biohacking movement. And at first I wasn't really bought, but by the end of it, I was loving this session. This was the coolest thing ever. So Dave gets on stage, and the first thing he says is, what is your normal state? Take a moment to think about it. And that this whole talk is going to be a summary of practices about how to alter your state. And, he's not talking about necessarily like taking drugs. He's saying like, what makes you happy? What makes you sad? What makes you tired? What makes you focused? And what is normal? What is your standard state? Think about what that is. And if it's a challenging question, it's supposed to be. And I'm going to breeze through it because he went into his backstory about how he used to be really overweight in his 20s and dealing with a lot of bad brain fog. And he learned at 26 that his testosterone was lower than his mom's. And this was included with him being a vegan and working out 90 minutes a day. And so he decided to do something about it. He did also mention that by the time he was like 27, he had like $8 million. So what I'm about to say next makes sense. That he studied, the next 20 years, he studied meditation and spirituality with shamans around the world. But he comes from an engineering background. So what he did is he noticed that this vegan and exercise thing he was doing wasn't really working. It may have been helping his body, but it wasn't helping his brain function. So he built, through his studies with all these shamans from India and South America and Nepal and basically everywhere all over the world, he talked about how we all rely on altered states. He even mentioned whirling dervishes, which I thought was like a great example of how whirling dervishes are these guys that spin around to get dizzy, to enter some sort of like altered state meditation. I don't know too much about it, but I've heard the term before. And he all focused this on like longevity, on like mental cognitive longevity. And that the knowledge passed down to us from our parents who lived through I guess it'd be his parents, I don't know how old he is, but he's much older than I am, wasn't working. And he wanted to go find a new way to do it. He mentioned how he meditates every day and how important it is. And the best part of it is he basically listed out all these ways to achieve altered states. And I'm going to bounce around here in my notes, so forgive me for this, but I want to get this right. He talked about how to transcend, and that forgiveness is the most important part of transcendence. He listed out, I have them written down, I won't read them all to you, but like 10 different styles of breath work that he says achieve this level of transcendence, how light and sound can achieve this level of transcendence. And this being one of my focuses for the course, he listed out different psychedelics, from cannabis, which he honestly didn't really endorse cannabis. He said it's not that great, don't really use it, to ketamine, to MDMA, to psilocybin, to LSD, to ibogaine, to ayahuasca. Saying on that last note that only take ayahuasca for a trained shaman and only do it that you have to. He talked about advanced brain techniques like the God helmet. He talked about how sexual energy changes our state of being. He even talked about how brief intentional exposure to pain changed our being. And I'm keeping an eye on my time here, trying to keep this in the appropriate slot. But it was a really interesting talk, and I'm bouncing around sort of his presentation a bit to say that, like, he presented all this information, meditation, breathing exercises, drugs, sexual energy. There was even one about brief intentional exposure to pain, which he said resets your dopamine center. And this is stuff like, slapping yourself on the wrist, or like waking up, people wake up and slack their cheeks, things like that. And he mentioned all this in the context of like, I know this stuff works. And he showed a slide of this because he had developed this whole brain lab where he could measure everywhere from beta, delta, gamma, theta, and I think there might have been another one, brain waves, while people are going through all these different kinds of altered states to harness peak performance. And he showed us a picture of it. It was like this big, it almost looked like a sensory deprivation tank, like this big pod that you go into, and there's a chair that you're sitting in, and you have all these like wires and cups on your head, and they're inside of this pod, there's sensors, and I think it's intentionally developed to sort of block outside sources. And you go into this pod, and he's done all these experiments where he's basically went through everything I just said, met different types of meditation, different types of psychedelics, different types of, he didn't really say it this way, but I guess sexual stuff too, maybe? I'm inferring that now as I sort of put this together. And he could measure it. He could see that like these breathing exercises, for example, were affecting people's minds. And he'd put like monks who had studied meditation for 40 years and see that they could activate this gamma brainwave, which according to him rides off the back of other brainwaves, like a surfer was his analogy, that nobody could be able to do that except these people that have really studied meditation. So it was like, I don't know, not my word. I believe in a lot of this. I believe in a lot of what he was saying, but he was kind of presenting all this stuff that like the general public may consider as like nonsense or just like, hippie science, but saying like, no, I have the real science to back it up. I can show you the math. I can show you the stats. I can show you the number. And he talked, and I'm trying to fit it all in here. He spoke how it all comes down to mitochondria. He talked about like carnal caveman instincts, and that you're basically just mitochondria constantly fighting off what he called the 4 F words that run your life. And the 4 F words that run your life, according to him, are fear, food, fertility being sex, and friends. And that's in order. And he sort of says that what your brain does is that's how it processes things. It processes things on a fear-based level that you learn when you're a kid. This is like how people have anxiety. And then another thing that controls your brain is food cravings, and then fertility and sex. And then if it doesn't fit into one of those 3 categories, your brain asks yourself the question of, is it a friend or is it a foe? And he was talking about that you can sort of control all of these through forgiveness, and this power of forgiveness to, quote, turn off the fear and be your own puppet master and sort of manipulate your own brain. And again, this is stuff that he's he can measure. He's measured all this. And there was one moment where he says you can rewire yourself to see your food as a source of nourishment, as energy instead of a craving. He used to talk about, in his opening remarks that I kind of blew through, he talked about how he used to be extremely overweight and food was like a safety thing for him, but he was able to rewire his brain so that food never became an emotion, a craving. It became just, nutrients. And I'm trying to go quick here, but he talked about the way that what human beings have to do is to reach this level of transcendence through fear. And the way that they do that, I'm trying to make sure I get this right, is through a reset process of gratitude. And he says gratitude not only for yourself, but for other people, for the things around you, for the events. And that's how you achieve this forgiveness. And that's how you sort of become your own puppet master, control yourself. And all these techniques, from breathing to psychedelic drugs to meditation, are all ways to sort of work on this gratitude process to achieve this reset, to get forgiveness, to overcome fear, and therefore control those 3 remaining F words. And it was incredibly mind-blowing. And I'm wrapping up, but at the very end, he took us through an exercise on how to do it. And from like a neuroscience, health, psychedelic standpoint, it was just brilliant.